Whose painting is that? That boy lived with me in the orphanage. Her words fell like raindrops on a 30-year silence. Her trembling hands pointed at the forgotten portrait. Two children in front of a white piano. Like the echo of an interrupted melody, absence had marked their lives. Eyes that searched without finding, hearts that beat in different cities, unaware that the other was still alive. But destiny, with the softness of fingers over ivory keys, wove a reunion that not even the cruelest separation could prevent. If this story of hope has touched your heart, leave your like as if caressing an old photograph you thought was lost forever. And tell us, how do you think this story of brothers separated by time but united by music will end? Clara Jimenez adjusted her grey uniform before entering the service door of the Menendez mansion. The Seville sun fell like liquid gold over the centenary olive trees surrounding the property. She took a deep breath, pressing the folder with her references against her chest. At 42, starting as a housekeeper in a new house was always intimidating, especially in a mansion like this, where every object seemed to whisper stories of wealth and privilege. Punctuality. Good sign, said the housekeeper, a severe-faced woman with her hair pulled back in a perfect bun. I am Maria. Mr. Arturo is extremely meticulous about order. He does not tolerate delays or carelessness. Clara nodded silently as she followed Maria, through marble corridors and rooms where the light drew geometric patterns on antique furniture. The contrast with her small apartment on the outskirts, where she raised her teenage daughter alone, was overwhelming. This house has history, Maria continued, and also secrets. Don't ask unnecessary questions and stick to your work. In the main hall, Clara paused briefly before an imposing portrait. Two blonde children sitting in front of a white piano, their small hands joined on the keys. Something in that image stirred a distant echo in her memory, but Maria urged her to continue. The master will be away this morning. You will start with the east wing. Everything must be impeccable. With hands rough from years of hard work, Clara began her task in silence, wiping every surface with meticulous dedication. It was not just a job. It was her chance to keep her daughter in college, a luxury she never had. Arturo Menendez watched the city from the panoramic window of his office in the financial district. At 45, his blonde hair was beginning to show silver threads at his temples, and his blue eyes reflected the weight of someone who has built an empire but has lost something irreplaceable along the way. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Arturo, the investors are impatient. The voice of Rafael Solano, his partner and friend since college, sounded tense. You should be here. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he replied, adjusting his Swiss watch. Let them wait. As he hung up, his gaze lingered on the framed photograph on his desk, himself as a child, next to his little brother, Daniel. 30 years had passed since that day in Maria Luisa Park, when, in a moment of distraction, Daniel disappeared forever. His mother did not withstand the pain and passed away years later. His father immersed himself in business until his heart failed. And he, the older brother who had promised to protect him, became the heir to an empire built on absence. Arturo lightly stroked the photograph before putting it away in his desk drawer. Memories had no place in business meetings. In a small square in Asturias, under a sky that threatened rain, Daniel River, as he was now called, set up his easel in front of the church. His paint-stained hands trembled slightly as he prepared the brushes. At 34, his face showed a melancholic maturity, as if he had lived several lives in one. Tourists and locals occasionally stopped to watch how his agile strokes captured the essence of the place, the ancient stone, the filtered light, the long shadows. But what no one knew was that in every landscape, in every portrait, Daniel hid fragments of a persistent memory. Two children, a white piano, windows where light streamed in like liquid gold. "Good morning, master," greeted Antonio, the old man who sold newspapers on the corner. "Are you painting children again today?" Daniel smiled softly. It was true. When he didn't have specific clients, his brushes always found their way to the same scene. Two blonde children, one older than the other, playing a piano that seemed to glow with its own light. "They are memories, Antonio, perhaps from another life." The square filled up as the morning progressed. A family stopped in front of his easel and asked for a portrait. As he painted, Daniel felt that familiar restlessness, that emptiness that no landscape or face could fill. In his small house studio, he kept dozens of notebooks filled with similar drawings, large windows, pianos, and always the two children. Sometimes he wrote a name that emerged from some forgotten corner of his mind. Arturo. "I don't understand why I keep drawing the same thing," he had once confessed to Maria, the owner of the guest house where he lived when he arrived in the town. "It's as if my hands remember something my mind forgot." That night, as he packed up his materials in the dim light of dusk, he could not imagine that hundreds of kilometers away, in a Seville mansion, a woman was about to recognize his childhood face in a forgotten portrait. The main corridor of the Menendez mansion was a silent testament to generations of wealth and tradition. Clara had spent all morning meticulously cleaning every surface, discreetly observing the details that revealed the life of her new employer. Photographs framed in silver, real estate company awards, but curiously, no recent family images. It was then that she saw it. At the end of the hall, on a wall partially hidden by a column, hung a portrait that seemed to defy time. Two blonde children sitting in front of a white piano, their small hands joined on the keys, smiled at the camera with that innocence that only childhood possesses. The elder, whom Clara recognized as a young Arturo Menendez, put a protective arm around the little one, but it was the face of the younger boy that made the duster slip from her hands and fall to the floor with a dull thud that echoed in the silence of the mansion. "My God, I know him," she murmured. Her voice choked. Her knees buckled as memories flooded her mind. That childish face, those slightly asymmetrical blue eyes, the small, almost imperceptible scar above the left eyebrow. There was no doubt. It was Daniel, the solitary boy from the San Vicente Orphanage, where she had lived part of her adolescence before being adopted. Daniel, the boy who obsessively drew pianos and houses with large windows. The one who swore he had an older brother and a family looking for him. The one the other children considered a fabulist, a dreamer who invented stories to cope with abandonment. "It can't be," Clara whispered, picking up the duster with trembling hands. Maria suddenly appeared, startling her. "Is something wrong?" she asked with an inquisitive look. "No, nothing," Clara replied, trying to compose herself. "I just got distracted for a moment." "That's the Master Menendez's little brother," Maria explained, her voice suddenly softened. "He disappeared 30 years ago. The Master never stopped looking for him." Clara nodded in silence, feeling destiny weaving an incomprehensible plot around her. Because she knew what no one in that mansion knew. Daniel, the boy from the orphanage, the one who drew pianos and houses with large windows, existed, and she knew where to find him. 3 days passed before Clara gathered the necessary courage. Every morning she arrived at the mansion with the intention of speaking to Arturo Menendez, and every afternoon she left with the truth stuck in her throat. What if she was wrong? What if the resemblance was just a cruel coincidence? Worse yet, what if she lost her job for meddling in matters that did not concern her? But the coincidences were too many, and every time she passed the portrait, she felt that the eyes of little Daniel were following her, pleading. That Friday afternoon, when Arturo returned early from the office, Clara knew it was time. She found him in the library, reviewing documents with a tired expression. "Excuse me, Mr. Menendez," she said from the doorway, her voice barely audible. "I need to talk to you about something important." Arturo looked up, surprised. It was the first time that silent woman had addressed him directly. "Is there a problem with your work?" "Maria has only given me good reports," he replied with formal kindness. Clara took a deep breath before taking a step forward. "It's not about my job, sir. It's about the portrait in the hall, the two children at the piano." Arturo's expression visibly hardened. Few people dared to mention Daniel. "What about that portrait?" he asked with a coldness that contrasted with his previous tone. "The little boy, your brother," Clara continued, nervously twisting the edge of her apron. "I think I know him." The silence that followed was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. Arturo slowly stood up, as if every movement required an extraordinary effort. "What did you say?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I lived in the San Vicente Orphanage during my adolescence," Clara explained, the words tumbling out. "There was a boy named Daniel. He had the same scar above his left eyebrow as your brother. He always drew a white piano and a house with large windows. He said he had an older brother named Arturo. No one believed him. Arturo approached with such intensity in his gaze that Clara instinctively stepped back. "Where is he?" he asked with a trembling voice. "If this is a cruel joke—" "It's not, sir," Clara replied, holding his gaze. "The last I heard of him, he was in Asturias. He goes by the name of Daniel River. He is a painter." Arturo's face reflected an inner battle. Disbelief, hope, fear. 30 years of fruitless searches, false leads, shattered hopes. "Daniel," he murmured, the name sounding strange and familiar, at the same time on his lips. He used his own name. "There's more, sir," Clara continued. "In the orphanage no one knew where Daniel came from. One day he simply appeared, brought by a woman who claimed to be a social worker. The papers were never in order." Arturo fell heavily into his armchair, his mind racing with possibilities. For 30 years he had hired the best detectives, traveled half of Spain, followed every rumor, every lead without success. And now this woman, this housekeeper, appeared with a story that perfectly fit the missing pieces of the puzzle. "Why should I believe you?" he finally asked, his voice tinged with a hope he tried to contain. "Because I was also an orphan, sir," Clara replied simply, "and because I have this." From her pocket she pulled out a worn photograph, a group of teenagers in front of a grey building, and among them she pointed to a young man about 14 years old who looked at the camera with a distant expression. "This is Daniel," she said. "If you don't believe me, check for yourself." Arturo took the photograph with trembling hands. The resemblance was undeniable. Those eyes, that chin, it was like looking at his father in his youth. It was Daniel without a doubt. 30 years, he murmured, more to himself than to Clara. 30 years looking for you, and you were there all the time. When he looked up at Clara, his eyes shone with a mixture of determination and infinite gratitude. "Tomorrow we leave for Asturias," he declared. "If what you say is true, I will change your life forever." The San Vicente Orphanage stood like a grey shadow among green hills on the outskirts of Toledo. What was once an imposing institutional building was now a semi-abandoned structure, with bricked-up windows and ivy climbing its walls like a slow vegetal conqueror. Arturo stopped his Mercedes in front of the rusty entrance. Beside him, Clara observed the place with a mixture of nostalgia and apprehension. The memories were not exactly happy, but they were hers, part of the history that had shaped her. "It looks abandoned," Arturo commented, scrutinizing the building with an analytical gaze. "They closed it 10 years ago," Clara explained. "There were complaints, investigations, but they never reached anything conclusive." They walked along the gravel path to the main door. The silence was almost reverential, as if the place guarded secrets it refused to reveal easily. Arturo, accustomed to opening doors with his name and his fortune, found the entrance locked. "We will have to find another way to get in," he said, circling the building. In the back they found an elderly man pruning the wild bushes that threatened to devour what remained of an old garden. "Excuse me," Arturo called. "We are looking for information about this place, about someone who lived here." The old man looked at them suspiciously, his eyes narrowed under thick eyebrows. "The orphanage is closed," he replied dryly. "There's no one left." "I am Clara Jimenez," she intervened, taking a step forward. "I was here until I was 16. Don't you remember me, Mr. Thomas?" The man's face softened as he recognized her. "Little Clara?" he smiled, revealing yellowish teeth. "Of course I remember you. Always helping in the kitchen, always looking after the little ones." "I am looking for information about Daniel," Clara explained. "The boy who drew pianos." Tomas's expression suddenly changed. "Why are you asking about him after so long?" he inquired with renewed suspicion. "Because I believe he is my brother," Arturo intervened, his voice firm. "My brother Daniel, who disappeared 30 years ago in Seville." A tense silence settled between them. Finally, Tomas sighed deeply. "You should talk to Sister Magdalena," he said, lowering his voice as if afraid of being overheard. "She is the only one left from those times. She lives in the old chaplain's house behind the chapel." Following his directions, they found a small stone house partially hidden by cypress trees. Arturo knocked on the door, which opened to reveal an elderly woman with a face furrowed with wrinkles but surprisingly lively eyes. "Sister Magdalena," Clara greeted with respect. "I don't know if you remember me." "Clara Jimenez," the old woman interrupted with a warm smile. "Of course I remember you. And you. She directed her penetrating gaze towards Arturo. "You have the same eyes as little Daniel." She invited them into a modest but impeccable room, where the walls were covered with black and white photographs, generations of homeless children who had passed through San Vicente. "I have waited for this moment for decades," Sister Magdalena confessed as she served tea in chipped cups. "I always knew that someday someone would come to ask about him." "What do you know about my brother?" Arturo asked, leaning forward. The old woman sighed as if preparing to reveal a long-kept secret. "Daniel arrived one October morning, almost 30 years ago," she began. "A woman who introduced herself as a social worker brought him. She said he had been found wandering alone in Madrid. But the papers, there was something strange about them. I tried to contact the authorities, but no one seemed interested." "And the boy?" Arturo pressed. "What did he say?" "At first nothing. He was in shock. But after a few weeks, he began to talk about his family in Seville, about his brother Arturo, about a white piano where they played together." The old woman paused. "No one believed him. They thought it was a fantasy, a way to escape his reality. But I kept his drawings." With slow movements, Sister Magdalena stood up and took a cardboard box from a cupboard. Inside were school notebooks, children's drawings, small treasures preserved for decades. "Look," she said, handing one of the notebooks to Arturo. As he opened it, Arturo felt his heart stop. There, drawn with childish but unmistakable strokes, was the Menendez mansion. The large windows, the olive trees, the white piano in the living room, and two figures holding hands. "Me and my brother Arturo," read a caption in childish handwriting. On the last page, in shaky writing, he had written, "One day my brother will find me." Arturo closed his eyes, overwhelmed by emotion. When he opened them again, they were wet. "What happened to him?" he asked with a hoarse voice. "He ran away at 14, Sister Magdalena replied. "He left a note saying he was going to look for his real family. We tried to find him, but it was as if the earth had swallowed him up. And now we know he is in Asturias," Clara intervened, "calling himself Daniel River, the name he never forgot." Sister Magdalena nodded slowly, a melancholic smile illuminating her wrinkled face. "I always prayed that he would find his way home," she murmured. "Perhaps God listens even if late." Arturo carefully put the drawing notebook away. It was tangible proof, a physical link to his lost brother. "I will find him," he promised, with the same determination with which he had built his empire. "This time, I will find him." The next destination in their search led them to a psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of Madrid. Following the clues left by Sister Magdalena, they discovered that Daniel had been briefly admitted there in 2012 after an accident. San Rafael Hospital was a modern building of glass and steel, nothing like the oppressive atmosphere of the old orphanage. However, Arturo felt the same restlessness as they walked through its aseptic corridors, following Dr. Elena Vasquez, head of the psychiatry department. "Normally we would not reveal information about former patients," the doctor explained as she reviewed the digitized file on her tablet. "But given the extraordinary circumstances and the judicial authorization you have presented, I will make an exception." They stopped in front of a door labeled Archive. The doctor typed a code, and they entered a room full of shelves with folders organized chronologically. "Here it is," she finally said, pulling out a blue folder. "Daniel Rodriguez, admitted on March 15, 2012 after a traffic accident. He presented partial amnesia and dissociative episodes." Arturo took the folder with trembling hands. Inside were medical reports, psychological evaluations, and, most valuable, photographs. The young man in the images, about 20 years old, had a bandage on his head, but his face was unmistakable. It was Daniel, his Daniel, with his father's features and his own eyes. "Do you remember anything about him?" Arturo asked, trying to maintain the professional composure that characterized him in business. "Personally, no," the doctor admitted, but according to the notes of Dr. Salgado, who treated him, he was an unusual patient. He suffered amnesia regarding his identity, but clearly remembered having grown up in an orphanage, and he constantly drew. From the folder she pulled out several sheets, drawings of a white piano, a mansion with large windows, two children holding hands. Dr. Salgado interpreted these drawings as fragmented memories or possibly compensatory fantasies, she explained. "It is common in patients with early trauma to develop alternative narratives to cope with abandonment. They are not fantasies, Clara intervened firmly. They are real memories, we are sure. The doctor looked at them with renewed interest. The patient was here for 3 weeks, she continued. Then, against medical advice, he signed himself out. He left a guest house in Toledo as a contact address, but when we tried to locate him for follow-up, he had already left. Did he mention anything about going to Asturias? Arturo asked. Not specifically, the doctor replied, reviewing the notes. But there is something interesting here. In his last session, he told Dr. Salgado that he wanted to find a place where the fog and the sea could talk to his paintings. Asturias, Clara murmured. He was describing Asturias. The doctor closed the folder with a professional gesture. There is something else. You should know, she added. The final diagnosis was dissociative disorder, with elements of post-traumatic stress. Dr. Salgado recommended continued therapy, which he obviously did not receive. If you find him, she paused significantly, don't expect it to be a simple reunion. 30 years of separation and trauma are not resolved with a hug, however emotional it may be. Arturo nodded gravely. He did not expect it to be easy. Nothing related to Daniel's disappearance ever had been. Thank you for your help, Doctor, he said, shaking her hand. It has been more valuable than you can imagine. As they left the hospital, Clara observed Arturo's tense face. Are you all right, sir? She asked with genuine concern. After so many years of searching, he replied with a contained voice, I fear what I will find. He is no longer the little boy I remember. He is a man forged in adversity, marked by experiences I cannot even imagine. But he is still your brother, Clara said softly. And from what we have seen, he never stopped looking for you either, even if it was through his drawings. Arturo looked at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set over Madrid. Tomorrow we leave for Asturias, he declared. It is time to end this search. The town of San Martín de las Nieblas in the heart of Asturias seemed straight out of a fairy tale. Stone houses with slate roofs, narrow streets that wound towards a central square dominated by a centenary church, and the sea, always present, whispering in the distance. Arturo and Clara arrived on a Tuesday morning, when the fog still clung to the roofs like a ghostly veil. Following the directions they had obtained at the Oviedo tourist office, they headed to the square where, they had been told, a local painter set up his easel every morning. Arturo's heart was beating fast as they walked through the cobbled streets. 30 years of searching culminated in this moment. How would Daniel react upon seeing him? Would he recognize him? Would he even want to talk to him? The square was almost empty at that hour. An old man sold newspapers from a small kiosk, a woman swept the entrance to a bakery, and there, next to the central fountain, a man with his back to them was setting up an easel. Arturo stopped, unable to take another step. It was as if his feet were anchored to the ground. It's him, Clara murmured, recognizing the figure despite the years that had passed. It's Daniel River. From where they could observe him without being seen. Daniel, because it was him undoubtedly, worked with precise and elegant movements, preparing his brushes, adjusting a blank canvas. He was dressed simply, worn jeans, a blue shirt rolled up to the elbows, a grey scarf around his neck despite the mild day. His hair, blonde like Arturo's but longer, was tied back in a low ponytail. What should I say to him? Arturo whispered, suddenly insecure. He who never hesitated in boardrooms where millions of euros were decided. The truth, Clara replied simply. Just the truth. With a deep breath to muster his courage, Arturo walked towards the fountain. Each step seemed to carry him through decades. Each heartbeat echoed like a drum in his ears. When he was a few meters from the easel, he stopped. "Excuse me," he said, surprised by the firmness of his own voice. Daniel turned, and for an instant, time seemed to stop. Arturo found himself looking into eyes he knew better than his own. His mother's eyes, the eyes he had searched for in every face for 30 years. Daniel observed him with polite curiosity, without immediate recognition. His face, marked by time but still handsome, showed the lines of someone who has lived intensely. "Can I help you?" he asked in a soft, slightly hoarse voice, as if he didn't use it much. "Would you like a portrait?" Arturo felt short of breath. In front of him was his little brother, whom he had sworn to protect, whom he had failed so profoundly. And Daniel looked at him like a stranger. My name is Arturo Menendez, he finally managed to say, and I think you are my brother, Daniel. A dense silence fell between them. Daniel's eyes narrowed, a mixture of confusion and alarm crossing his face. I don't know what you're talking about, he finally replied, his voice tense. My name is Daniel River, and I don't have a family. Please, Arturo insisted, pulling the children's drawing notebook that Sister Magdalena had given him from his pocket. Just look at this. With obvious reluctance, Daniel took the notebook. As he opened it, his expression subtly changed. His hands, those hands that had painted the same scene hundreds of times without understanding why, began to tremble. These drawings, he murmured, flipping through the pages with increasing agitation. You made them, Arturo explained softly, at the San Vicente Orphanage, after you were kidnapped in Maria Luisa Park, in Seville. Daniel looked up. Abruptly, his eyes now filled with an emotion impossible to define. I have dreams, he said, almost to himself. Dreams about a park, doves, someone calling me. He broke off, shaking his head as if to clear his thoughts. But they are just dreams. Clara then approached, standing next to Arturo. Daniel, she said gently, using the name he knew in the orphanage. I am Clara. Do you remember me? We were together at San Vicente. Daniel's eyes widened when he recognized her. Clara, the girl from the kitchen. An incredulous smile appeared on his face. How did you find me? I've been looking for you for 30 years, Arturo intervened, his voice breaking slightly. I hired detectives, traveled half of Spain, followed every lead, no matter how small. And in the end it was Clara who found you. Daniel looked back at the drawings, running his fingers over the childish strokes, as if he could physically connect with the child who drew them. I always knew these drawings meant something, he murmured, but the doctors said they were fantasies, defense mechanisms against the trauma of abandonment. They weren't fantasies, Arturo affirmed. It was your memory trying to survive. Then, as if driven by an irresistible impulse, he pulled out a worn, antique photograph from his wallet. 2 blonde children sitting in front of a white piano. This is the last photo taken of us together, he said, handing it to him. A week before you disappeared. Daniel took the photograph, with trembling fingers. He studied it for a long moment, his eyes moving between the image and Arturo's face, searching for the connection, the confirmation of a truth too painful and beautiful to assimilate all at once. My brother called me champ, he finally murmured, a phrase that emerged from somewhere deep in his memory, a memory that had survived decades of forced oblivion. Arturo's eyes filled with tears. And I promised you I would always protect you, he replied with a broken voice. I failed you, Daniel. I failed you that day in the park. A silence charged with emotion enveloped them. Around them, the square continued its tranquil rhythm, oblivious to the drama unfolding next to the fountain, where 2 brothers separated by time and tragedy met again. I need time, Daniel finally said, taking a step back. This is too much. I understand, Arturo nodded, respecting his space. We will stay at the town hotel for a few days. When you are ready to talk, we will be there. Daniel nodded slowly, still holding the photograph and the notebook. Can I keep these for now? He asked, referring to both. Of course, Arturo replied. They are yours. They always were. As they walked away from the square, Clara glanced at Arturo, whose face showed a mixture of relief and anxiety. You've given him a lot to think about, she commented softly. And me too, Arturo replied, looking back one last time. He's my brother, Clara. After all this time, I finally found him. The following days passed in a kind of emotional limbo. Arturo and Clara remained in the small-town hotel, waiting. Every morning, Arturo walked to the square, where Daniel continued to set up his easel, as if nothing had changed. They greeted each other with uncomfortable formality, exchanged a few superficial words, and then Arturo would withdraw, respecting the space his brother clearly needed. In the afternoons, they explored the town, collecting fragments of the life Daniel had built there. They discovered that he was respected as a local artist, that he lived alone in a small house near the cliff, that he was reserved but kind, that he never talked about his past. It's like he found a refuge here, Clara commented as they had coffee on the terrace of the only restaurant in town, a place where no one asks questions. And now we arrive, digging up everything he has tried to forget. Arturo replied bitterly. Or perhaps, Clara suggested gently, uncovering truths he has always sought without knowing it. On the fourth day, when Arturo had almost given up hope, he found Daniel waiting for him in front of the hotel, sitting on a bench, with the drawing notebook on his lap. "Good morning," Daniel greeted with a tense voice. "I thought we could talk." They walked in silence to the small harbour, where the sea gently broke against the stone piers. They sat on a bench facing the horizon, two men so similar and yet so different, with 30 years of absence between them. "I've been dreaming," Daniel began, looking out at the sea. "Since you showed me these images, the dreams are more vivid, more frequent. Fragments that never made sense begin to fit together." "What do you remember?" Arturo asked gently. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, as if searching inside himself. "I remember a white piano, and your hands guiding mine over the keys," he finally said. "I remember a beautiful woman, with your same hair, singing while we played. Our mother, I suppose." "Yes," Arturo confirmed, emotion tightening his throat. "She loved to listen to us play. She used to say we were her private orchestra." "I remember the park," Daniel continued, his voice now lower. "The doves, a pond. I ran after them. I wanted to touch them." He stopped, his face tensing. "Then there is darkness," he murmured. "A woman I don't know, a car, tears, screams. Then the orphanage, children mocking me because I talked about a brother and a piano that no one believed." "Existed." Arturo listened in silence, every word like a stab of guilt and remorse. "I was looking after you that day in the park," he finally explained. "Mom wasn't feeling well, and Dad was working as always. I got distracted for a minute, just a minute, talking to some older boys. When I turned around," his voice broke, "you had disappeared. The police later determined that you had been kidnapped by a child trafficking network. They followed several leads, but they all went cold. Mom never recovered. She died of grief 5 years later. Dad immersed himself in work until his heart failed, and I never stopped looking for you." Daniel nodded slowly, assimilating this story that was his, but sounded like a stranger's. "Sister Magdalena told me you ran away from the orphanage at 14, Arturo continued. "What happened next?" "I lived on the streets for a while," Daniel replied, his voice distant. "Then I found work in a restoration workshop in Toledo. The owner noticed I had a talent for drawing and taught me to paint. Over time, I became his apprentice." He paused, lost in memories. "I always drew the same thing. The piano, the house, 2 children. He encouraged me to explore it. He said that art was a way of healing. Then came the accident, the hospital, and I decided to come here where no one knew me, where I could be whoever I wanted." "And you chose to call yourself Daniel," Arturo observed. "Your real name." Daniel smiled weakly. "I never knew why that name resonated so much with me," he confessed. "It just felt right." A contemplative silence fell between them. The seagulls screamed over their heads. The sea whispered eternal stories against the rocks. "There is DNA evidence," Arturo finally said. "If you need to confirm—" "No," Daniel interrupted with surprising firmness. "I don't need it." He held up the drawing notebook. "These are my memories. No one could invent them. And you—" He looked directly at Arturo. "You have the eyes of a woman in my dreams. Our mother." He extended a trembling hand, and for the first time touched Arturo's face, as if he wanted to make sure he was real. "My brother," he murmured, the words sounding strange and familiar at the same time on his lips. Arturo could not hold back any longer. 30 years of searching, of guilt, of hope, overflowed in a hug that seemed to contain a lifetime of absence. Daniel initially tensed, but then gave in, allowing himself to be wrapped in those arms that had once held him when he was too small to sit at the piano alone. When they finally separated, both had wet eyes. "What happens now?" Daniel asked, genuinely disoriented. "Whatever you want," Arturo replied. "You can come with me to Seville, see your home, or I can stay here for a while and we get to know each other again. Or you might need more time alone. Whatever decision you make, I will respect it." Daniel looked out at the sea, thoughtful. "I want to see the piano," he finally said. "I want to see if my fingers remember what my mind forgot." The return to Seville was a journey through time as much as through geography. In the back seat of the car, Daniel watched the changing landscape with eyes that seemed to see beyond the visible, while Clara drove and Arturo occasionally pointed out places of interest, striving to fill the silence with casual conversation. "You've been very quiet," Arturo commented after several hours of travel. "Are you okay?" Daniel looked away from the window and gave him a small smile. "I'm remembering," he replied simply. "It's as if every kilometer awakens something inside me. It's overwhelming." "We can stop whenever you want," Arturo offered, concerned. "No," Daniel shook his head. "I want to continue. I've been waiting for this my whole life, even if I didn't know it." When they finally reached the outskirts of Seville, the sun was beginning to set, bathing the city in that golden light that only the Andalusian dusk can create. Daniel sat up, in his seat, suddenly alert. "This road," he murmured. "I recognize it." Arturo nodded, excited. "It's the way home." As they rounded the last curve, the Menendez mansion appeared before them, imposing and familiar. The large windows that let in light like liquid gold, the centenary olive trees, the fountain in the front garden where two children used to play, catching the water with their hands. Daniel held his breath. It was exactly as he had drawn it hundreds of times, as he had dreamed it, for decades. "It's just as I remember it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. They entered the garden slowly, as in a sacred procession. Maria, the housekeeper, waited at the main door, her usual severity softened by the emotion of the moment. "Welcome home, little Master Daniel," she said with a trembling voice. To everyone's surprise, Daniel approached her and spontaneously hugged her. "Maria," he said, recognizing her, "you always gave me cookies when Mom wasn't looking." The woman burst into tears, hugging him as if he were still the child who had disappeared. "We never lost hope," she sobbed. "Your room, we kept it intact all these years." The interior of the mansion was a museum of memories for Daniel. Every corner, every object seemed to whisper forgotten stories to him. He stopped in front of the portrait that Clara had seen that first day, the two brothers at the white piano. "This was just before," he murmured, lightly touching the image. "I remember that day. Mom insisted we dress the same. I hated that bow tie." Arturo laughed softly, tears never far from the surface. "You took it off as soon as the photo shoot was over," he confirmed. "You said you looked like a penguin with a sore throat." Daniel smiled, surprised by the specific memory that had just emerged. They continued the tour until they reached the main living room, where the white grand piano waited, silent and majestic, as if it had been waiting for this moment for 30 years. Daniel approached slowly, almost reverently. He ran his fingers over the polished surface, feeling the connection to his deepest past. "Can I?" he asked, looking at Arturo. "It is as much yours as mine," his brother replied. "It always has been." With tentative movements, Daniel sat down on the piano bench. His hands trembled slightly as they rested on the yellowish keys. For a moment he seemed to hesitate, as if he feared the magic would break if he tried to draw music from that instrument that had starred in his dreams. Then slowly he began to play. The first notes were uncertain, exploratory, but gradually, like water finding its natural course, a melody began to take shape. It was a simple piece, a lullaby their mother used to hum while they played. Arturo recognized it instantly. Without a word, he sat next to his brother on the bench, as they had done hundreds of times when they were children. His hands joined Daniel's, complementing the melody, guiding him when he hesitated, following him when he remembered. The music that was born was imperfect but deeply moving, the sound of a bond that neither time nor tragedy had been able to destroy. When the last note faded into the silence of the living room, Daniel spoke with a broken voice. "I'm home, aren't I? I really am home." "Yes, champ," Arturo replied, using the childhood nickname. "You are finally home." The following days were a delicate dance between the past and the present. Daniel wandered the mansion like an explorer in territory that was both unknown and familiar, rediscovering spaces, objects, and memories that emerged like bubbles to the surface of a deep lake. Arturo watched him with a mixture of joy and worry, giving him space but staying close, fearing that this fragile reconciliation could break at any moment. One afternoon, as they were looking through old photo albums in the library, Daniel asked the question that had been hanging between them from the beginning. What really happened that day in the park? He asked in a calm but firm voice. "I need to know everything, Arturo." Arturo closed the album he was holding, preparing to relive the most painful day of his life. It was Sunday, he began, his gaze fixed on some distant point. Mom had a migraine and Dad was on a business trip in Madrid. I offered to take you to Maria Luisa Park. You loved the doves and the pond. He paused, gathering the courage to continue. We were near the Mudajar Pavilion. I was 14. I thought I was old enough to look after you. Some boys from my high school showed up and I got distracted talking to them. It was only minutes, but when I turned around, his voice cracked. You had disappeared. Daniel listened in silence, his face an indecipherable mask. The police arrived in minutes. They closed the park, interrogated everyone present. A woman said she saw a blonde boy getting into a dark car, but the description was vague. The security cameras captured little. It was as if you had vanished. Arturo stood up, unable to remain seated as he relived the nightmare. The following days were hell. Mum was devastated. Dad mobilized all his contacts. We appeared in the newspapers, on television. For weeks, all of Spain looked for you. He took out a folder full of yellowed newspaper clippings from a drawer. Son of prominent businessman disappears. Search for little Daniel continues. Millionaire reward offered. But the leads went cold. The police suspected a child. Trafficking network. There were arrests, but no one confessed, no one knew anything concrete. Eventually the case went inactive, although I never stopped searching. He approached Daniel, kneeling in front of him to look him directly in the eyes. I will never forgive myself for failing you that day, he said with a trembling voice. It was my responsibility to protect you. Daniel remained silent for what seemed like an eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but firm. I have fragmented memories, he said. A woman offering me sweets, telling me you were waiting for me in the car. I didn't feel scared at first. She was kind. Then there was a long journey, crying, darkness. Then the orphanage, where no one believed my stories about my family and the piano. He looked at the newspaper clippings with a thoughtful expression. It's strange to be on both sides of the story, to be the lost child, and now the adult who understands the magnitude of what happened. Arturo expected reproaches, anger, but Daniel simply extended a hand and touched his shoulder. It wasn't your fault, he said with surprising serenity. We were children, Arturo, both victims of something we couldn't control or understand. How can you not hate me? Arturo asked, overwhelmed by his brother's compassion. Your entire life was stolen by my negligence. It wasn't stolen, Daniel corrected softly. It was different. Difficult, yes. Painful, no doubt. But it also made me who I am. My art, my way of seeing the world, everything was born from that experience. He stood up and walked towards the window, observing the olive trees in the garden. And now we have a second chance, he continued. I won't waste it feeding grudges. Arturo joined him by the window, moved by the wisdom his brother had developed through suffering. There is something else you should know, he said, deciding it was time to reveal the whole truth. The investigators I hired years ago discovered part of what happened after your kidnapping. Daniel looked at him expectantly. A nurse at the Seville Children's Hospital was involved, Teresa Gomez. She had debts, gambling problems. She handed you over to a couple who couldn't have children and were willing to pay, Nicolas and Elena Rodriguez. Daniel visibly tensed upon hearing those names. My adoptive parents, he murmured. They died in a car accident when I was 7. After that, I went to the orphanage. I know, Arturo confirmed. When the police started investigating the nurse, she disappeared. They found her years later in Portugal, but by then the Rodriguezes had passed away, and you were in the system, with another name. Daniel assimilated this information with a somber expression. Did they know? He finally asked. Did they know I was a kidnapped child? According to Teresa's confession, yes, Arturo replied with regret. She told them you were the son of a teenager who didn't want you, but the dates coincided with your disappearance in the newspapers. They must have known the truth, but they chose to ignore it. A heavy silence fell between them, charged with the implications of this revelation. They would have faced charges if they were alive, Arturo continued. But also, they took care of you in their own way. In the photos we recovered from their house, you looked not unhappy. Daniel closed his eyes, processing this new dimension of his story. I was fond of them, he finally confessed. They were strict but not cruel. They never talked about my origins. They avoided my questions. Now I understand why. "What do you want to do with this information?" Arturo asked. "We could press charges against the accomplices who are still alive, seek justice." "No," Daniel interrupted with surprising firmness. "I'm not looking for revenge, Arturo. Justice won't give me back the lost years, and punishment won't heal our wounds." He looked at his brother with clear, serene eyes. "I want to look forward, not back. Use this second chance to build, not to destroy." Arturo looked at his younger brother with renewed astonishment and respect. The child he had sworn to protect had become a man of profound wisdom. "How did you become so wise, champ?" he asked with a sad smile. "I learned to see beauty even in adversity," Daniel replied simply. "It's what kept me alive, what made me an artist, and now it's what will allow us to heal." The news of Daniel Rivers' return spread quickly throughout Seville. The story was too extraordinary, too emotional to remain a secret. The child who disappeared 30 years ago, now an artist, reunited with his brother after decades of searching. The newspapers wanted interviews, the television channels offered exclusives. Arturo, accustomed to managing the press for his businesses, set up a protective cordon around his brother. "You don't need to face this if you don't want to," he assured him one morning over breakfast on the terrace. "I can keep them away." Daniel sipped his coffee, thoughtful. During the 2 weeks he had been in the mansion, he had begun to recover not only memories, but also a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in decades. "Perhaps it will be useful," he reflected. "My story, our story, could help other families who are still searching." Arturo nodded, moved by his brother's generosity of spirit. "Clara has been fundamental in all this," Daniel commented, subtly changing the subject. "Without her, we would never have found each other." Arturo smiled, looking out at the garden where Clara was chatting animatedly with Maria while picking oranges from the trees. "I offered her a permanent position as my personal assistant," he revealed. "But she insists on continuing her current duties. She says she prefers simplicity." "She is an extraordinary woman," Daniel commented with admiration. "She has that rare combination of strength and gentleness." The days had established a comforting routine. In the mornings, Daniel painted in the garden, capturing the Seville light he had unknowingly longed for on his canvases. In the afternoons, he and Arturo reviewed legal documents to officially restore his identity. And in the evenings, they sometimes played the white piano together, rediscovering melodies that their fingers remembered better than their minds. "I've been thinking," Daniel said as he finished his breakfast, "about the future." Arturo looked at him expectantly, always afraid that his brother would decide to leave, return to his solitary life in Asturias. "I want to do something meaningful with this second chance," Daniel continued, "something that can help other children who, like me, were separated from their families." "What do you have in mind?" Arturo asked, intrigued. "A foundation," Daniel replied, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "Dedicated to locating missing children, supporting orphanages, improving child protection systems. We would use advanced technology, DNA databases, everything necessary to reunite families." Arturo smiled broadly. It was exactly the kind of project he had imagined proposing, but he was waiting for the right moment. "That's a magnificent idea," he approved. "We could call it the Piano Brothers Foundation." "I like it," Daniel nodded. "It symbolizes the connection that was never broken despite the distance and time." "I can provide the financial resources and contacts," Arturo offered. "My company has technology that could be adapted for searches and data matching. And I can contribute through art," Daniel complimented, "organizing charity exhibitions, using art as therapy for traumatized children, creating powerful visual campaigns." They looked at each other, feeling that synchronicity that only siblings can experience, as if their minds followed the same thought pattern. "Clara should also be part of this," Daniel suggested. "Her experience in the orphanage system would be invaluable." As if she had sensed they were talking about her, Clara approached the terrace with a basket of freshly picked oranges. "Good morning, gentlemen," she greeted with a smile. "The harvest has been generous today." "Clara," Arturo said, motioning for her to sit down, "we have something important to propose to you." They explained the idea of the foundation, the objectives, the shared vision of using their extraordinary reunion as a catalyst to help others. "We want you to be an integral part of the project," Arturo concluded. "Your perspective is unique and valuable." Clara looked at them alternately, visibly moved. "It would be an honor," she finally replied. "I have seen firsthand what happens in the system. The children who get lost in the paperwork, the families who give up due to lack of resources." "Then it is decided," Arturo declared, raising his coffee cup. "The Piano Brothers Foundation, a new beginning, not only for us, but for everyone who is still looking for their way home." 3 months. After the inauguration, the grand hall of the Hotel Alfonso XIII in Seville shone under crystal chandeliers. The city's elite, along with representatives of child protection organizations from all over Spain, had gathered for the official launch of the Piano Brothers Foundation. Arturo, elegant in his dark suit, supervised every detail with the same precision he applied to his businesses. Daniel, more informal but equally distinguished, contemplated the room decorated with reproductions of his paintings, scenes of reunions, of outstretched hands, of doors opening. "You're nervous," Clara observed, approaching Daniel with 2 glasses of champagne. "A little," he admitted with a shy smile. "I'm not used to so much attention." Clara, beautiful in a simple blue dress, handed him a glass. "You've come a long way from the square in San Martin," she commented. "We all have." It was true. The past few months had transformed their lives in ways none of them could have imagined. Clara had left her duties as a housekeeper to become the Foundation's program director. Daniel had moved his studio to Seville, although he kept his house in Asturias as a creative retreat. And Arturo, perhaps the most changed of all, had rediscovered a purpose that went beyond accumulating wealth and power. "It's time," announced Maria, who had insisted on personally supervising the catering for the event. Arturo stepped onto the small stage installed at one end of the hall. Conversations quieted as he approached the microphone. "Good evening and thank you for joining us," he began in a clear, firm voice. 30 years ago, on a day like any other, I lost my little brother in a park in this city. That loss defined my life, marked every decision, every achievement, every failure. I searched for Daniel in every face, in every street, in every country I visited." He paused, looking for his brother in the crowd. What I didn't know was that he was also looking for me, in his own way, through his art, through drawings that reproduced again and again the only memories he kept. A house with large windows, a white piano, 2 brothers playing together. The attendees listened in respectful silence, many visibly moved. "Our reunion was possible thanks to an extraordinary coincidence," he continued, pointing to Clara. "Or perhaps it was no coincidence at all, but destiny." Clara Jimenez, who had known my brother in the orphanage where he grew up, recognized his childish face in a portrait in our house. Without her courage to speak up, without her integrity, this miracle would not have happened. Clara lowered her gaze, uncomfortable with the public recognition, but deeply moved. "The Piano Brothers Foundation is born from our personal story, but it aspires to transcend it," Arturo explained. "We will use cutting-edge technology, legal resources, and psychological support to reunite separated families, to give a voice to those who have none, to illuminate the dark corners where children get lost in the system." Daniel joined his brother on stage, bringing with him a large covered canvas. "As an artist," he said, taking the microphone, "I have learned that images can communicate what words cannot reach. That is why the logo of our foundation tries to capture the essence of our mission." He uncovered the canvas, revealing a painting that showed 2 childish silhouettes with their backs to the audience, holding hands in front of a stylized piano whose keys transformed into a path towards the horizon. "Every child deserves to find their way home," Daniel declared, "whether it is the home of their birth or a new family that welcomes them with love. No one should grow up feeling like they belong nowhere, as happened to me for so many years." Applause resonated in the hall as Arturo took the floor again to present the Foundation's specific programs: search for missing children, improvement of orphanages, legal support for families in the reunification process, art therapy for traumatized children. At the conclusion of the formal presentation, the brothers went to the corner of the hall where a white piano, identical to the one from their childhood, had been installed. "To close this special night," Arturo announced, "my brother and I would like to share something personal. When we were children, our mother taught us a simple melody. For 30 years, each of us kept it alive in our own way. I, playing it in solitude, Daniel, painting it on canvases that no one understood. They sat together on the piano bench, exactly as in the portrait that had started everything. "This is the melody we never forgot," Daniel said, resting his fingers on the keys. The first notes floated in the air, crystalline and pure. It was a simple but deeply emotional composition, a lullaby their mother had adapted for them. The brothers' hands moved in perfect harmony, as if the 30 years of separation had never existed. The music filled the hall, enveloping those present in a story of loss and reunion, of persistent hope, of bonds that neither time nor distance can break. When the last note faded, there was a moment of reverent silence before the applause erupted. Among the moved crowd, Clara discreetly wiped away tears. She had been a witness and catalyst to a miracle, and now she was part of something bigger than herself, something that would transform lives as hers had been transformed. A year after the inauguration, the Piano Brothers Foundation had become a national reference in the search for and protection of minors. Its offices, located in an old Seville palace restored by Arturo, buzzed with activity. Lawyers, psychologists, investigators, and volunteers worked tirelessly on dozens of simultaneous cases. In the main office, Arturo was reviewing reports with Clara when Daniel entered, visibly excited. "We have confirmation," he announced without preamble. The DNA test was positive. Sofia Martin is definitely Carmela, Dominguez's daughter. Clara smiled broadly. It was the kind of news that gave meaning to all her work. A girl who had disappeared 12 years ago, presumed dead, had been located in a small town in Extremadura, living with the family that had illegally adopted her. "How is Carmela?" Arturo asked, remembering the mother who had come to them as a last resort, after all official institutions had abandoned the search. "In shock, but happy," Daniel replied. "Our psychological team is working with both of them to prepare the reunion. The girl does not remember her previous life. It will have to be a gradual process." Clara nodded, aware of the delicacy needed in these cases. "And the adoptive family?" she inquired. "Cooperating, fortunately," Daniel explained. "They insist they didn't know the girl had been kidnapped. They adopted her through an intermediary who assured them it was legal. Our legal team is assessing their degree of responsibility, but the priority is Sofia's well-being." Arturo stood up and approached the large map of Spain that covered one wall of the office. Small colored markers indicated cases at different stages: recent disappearances, ongoing searches, successful reunions. In 1 year, they had managed to reunite 11 families and were on the trail of dozens more. "It is our most emblematic case so far," he commented, pointing to the marker representing Sofia. "It will show that even after so many years there is hope." Daniel nodded, thoughtful. "It reminds me a lot of our story," he said. "The difference is that Sofia will have professional support for her transition. She won't have to navigate that emotional labyrinth alone as we had to do." Clara watched the brothers with silent admiration. In the last year, their relationship had blossomed into something beautiful and profound. The wounds had not disappeared. They never would completely, but they had found ways to build from them, not despite them. "The fundraising event is tonight," she reminded them. "We should get ready." The Grand Theatre of Seville hosted a charity gala that night where Daniel would exhibit his new collection, Paths of Return, a series of paintings inspired by the stories of the families reunited thanks to the foundation. The social and cultural elite of the city had sold out the tickets weeks before. Hours later, the theatre lobby glowed with lights and animated conversations. Arturo, impeccable in his tuxedo, received guests alongside Clara, elegant in an emerald green dress. Daniel, less formal but equally distinguished, chatted with art critics and potential donors in front of his works. "What you have achieved in such a short time is extraordinary," commented the mayor of Seville, admiring one of the most impactful paintings, a canvas showing hands of different sizes intertwined against a background of fragments of maps and blurred photographs. "It is only the beginning," Arturo replied with determination. "Every child who finds their way home motivates us to search for the next." At the appointed time, the guests took their seats in the auditorium. The stage, soberly lit, contained only a white grand piano and 2 chairs. Daniel and Arturo appeared together, greeted with warm applause. "Thank you for joining us on this special night," Arturo began. "A year ago, we inaugurated the Piano Brothers Foundation with a promise to use our story of separation and reunion as a driving force to bring other families together. Today we celebrate 11 promises kept, Daniel continued. 11 families reunited, 11 stories of perseverance and hope. And as we speak, our teams are working on dozens more cases. Arturo pointed to the paintings displayed in the lobby. My brother's art captures what words cannot: the pain of absence, the persistence of memory, the indescribable joy of reunion. Because we could not recover the lost time. He paused significantly. But we could recover the love that sustained it, Daniel completed, quoting the words Arturo had spoken a year earlier. They sat together at the piano as they had done hundreds of times since their reunion. Their hands, now perfectly coordinated after months of joint practice, began to weave a new melody, composed by Daniel especially for the occasion. It was more complex than the lullaby of their childhood, but it maintained its essence, transforming it into something richer, deeper, more hopeful. As they played, images of the families reunited, thanks to the foundation, were projected on a giant screen behind them. Trembling hugs, tears of joy, hands meeting after years of searching. The last image showed Arturo and Daniel in front of the white piano at the Menendez mansion, their adult faces superimposed on the childhood photograph that had started everything. The final notes resonated in the theater, followed by a moment of moved silence that turned into a standing ovation. Clara, from the front row, watched them with deep pride and affection, aware that she had been part of something extraordinary, of a miracle that would continue to expand in concentric circles of hope. Later, as the guests began to leave, Daniel found a quiet moment with his brother in a corner of the lobby. Sometimes I wonder what Mum would think of all this, he commented, contemplating the success of the event. She would be proud, Arturo replied without hesitation. Of you, especially. Of how you transformed pain into beauty, loss into purpose. Daniel smiled, a gesture that had become more frequent and natural as the months passed. You know, for years I painted pianos and houses with large windows without understanding why, he reflected. Now I understand that they were not just fragmented memories. They were maps that were guiding me home. Arturo nodded, moved by the depth of the observation. And now, we are creating maps for others, he added, so that no one has to navigate the darkness alone, as you did. They looked at each other, recognizing in the other's eyes not only the familiar reflection of their shared heritage, but also the profound understanding that is only born from having lost something precious and having recovered it when it was thought impossible. We couldn't recover the lost time, Daniel murmured, repeating the words that had become the foundation's motto. But we recovered the love that sustained it. And that love, Arturo completed, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder, is all that really matters. From somewhere in the theater, the last notes of the piano seemed to resonate like an echo, like the fulfilled promise of a reunion that had waited 30 years to happen, and that now extended its healing melody to other lives, other destinies, other hearts still searching for their way home.